Hello there everybody, Sam's Trains here, welcome back to the railway and welcome to another review. Up today it's another American diesel from Bachmann. Today's loco is quite unusual for a number of reasons. Firstly, I do believe this is the smallest ever Bobo diesel I have ever owned, and I'm really looking forward to seeing it. Secondly, it's quite inexpensive, which is very rare these days. And thirdly, unlike most of my American diesel locomotives, or American locos full stop really, I did not buy this one from America. It did not come from Train World, which is where most of my American locos come from. It actually came from Kerno, who is a British retailer of model railway stuff, who were stocking these for some reason. So this is the locomotive. It is the General Electric 44-ton switcher, which is complete with DCC. And that sounds like quite an expensive recipe, doesn't it? Although, of course, it was not. I have seen this for sale in places for $129, which is about £100, seems very reasonable, but I did not pay that. At Kerno, this model was available for £59.99, which is stunning, isn't it? For DCC on board, that is amazing. Now, what am I expecting for that kind of money? Well, clearly I'm not expecting a particularly complex loco. I'm expecting hardwired DCC chips and such. I'm not expecting some sort of DCC socket where you could exchange the decoder and maybe convert it to analog. It's going to be produced more cheaply than that, I expect. But at the end of the day, it's a fully functional, hopefully, locomotive with DCC for less than £60. And that's always sure to grab my attention. So very curious to see what this is like. And of course, you're invited for the journey as well. So General Electric 44-ton switcher, let's take a look. So, unlike most American locomotives, this one does not appear to be tons larger than the types we see over here in the UK, even accounting for the fact that this is an HO scale loco and not a 001, as my UK-based shunters are. They do seem very similar in size, and yet this has the Bobo wheel configuration, whereas over here in the UK you'd have, say, 3 sets of wheels that are connected up with coupling rods. So it's a really interesting loco, and actually not being able to see the wheels like this makes you just think it's an 060 shunter or something, but it's not. So for me in particular, that's very, very interesting. Let me show you the end of the box then. So the product code for this is 62214. It is an HO scale GE 44-ton switcher loco DCC, and this is in the nickel plate livery, and it is number 90. And if I flip the box up onto its end, you can see some of its features. So the essential ones are 28-step speed control. That's actually not very good. I don't know why they would put that on the box. Hopefully it can do more than that, and then it might stand a chance of being able to crawl. It is NMRA compliant apparently. All-wheel drive, that's good to hear on such a small loco. It's got a can motor, die-cast chassis, which I like very much, and it is compatible apparently with traditional DC layouts, which of course I will test later on. But for now, let's get this out and see what it's like. The £60 DCC fitted shunter. And I've got to say, looking through the front of the box, the level of detail doesn't seem to be particularly low. It's hard to get a good idea until the thing's actually in your hands. But yeah, it doesn't look particularly simple. It's not mega complex by the looks of things, but for the price, I think it could be reasonably impressive. Right, let's have a look at this then. Bachmann DCC on board. This looks like some just generic information about Bachmann locomotives. Again, talking about 28 speed steps, and it's not saying that this can do any more, so we'll just have to wait and see. And then on the back, wow, look at this, a £60 loco. Quite some complexity here. So the body looks as though it's made of many, many different parts with lots of detailing added too. And there's the mechanism. I can see the can motor there, lots of gears to connect to the bogie wheels. And apart from that, the actual quality and design of the mechanism isn't entirely clear at the moment. So we'll have a look at that in just a while. What's this? That looks, again, just warranty, okay. Important notice, okay. It's just about suppression capacitors, so it's actually not an important notice, it's just something that they have to label as an important notice to satisfy some sort of legal red tape. let's dispose of it. And then what's this here then? It's yet another irritating leaf of paper advertising yet another 344-page full-colour combined Bachmann and Williams catalogue, 6.5 inch by 8.5 inch digest size, showing a horribly out-of-date 2013 catalogue with some horrible monstrosities on the front. Why the dickens would anybody want such a thing? I don't. Notice how I'm controlling my anger. I've been to classes for that. Not really. I don't want people to think I'm insane. Okay, I don't know what that is. Right, let's move on. Here we go. The loco itself. That's better. The loco itself. Okay, let's lift this up. And as always from Bachmann, we've got a marvellous finish to this. Look at that, so well painted, even such a cheap loco. And frankly, this is relatively cheap, even at the higher price I found, about £100 or so. You know, that's not a lot of money, and yet it's still been presented very, very nicely indeed. Let's lift this up and feel the weight, and yeah, it's not particularly heavy. All right, well, it's a smallish loco, so that's somewhat to be expected. But I'm also not feeling very much metal in my hands either. It did say that there's a die-cast chassis, and underneath, yeah, this section on the bottom is definitely metal, which is good. The rest of it, though, seems to be just plastic. And, you know, yeah, the loco is not blowing me away with its weight or its level of detail or its quality or anything. But on the other hand, for £60, it sounds as though this has a lot of features. The level of detail at a glance seems to be more than adequate. The decoration looks just fine as well. Really, this is the kind of model, assuming it works well of course, that we should be seeing a lot more of in this industry because it's affordable, hopefully functional, and accessible as a result. So we'll take a much closer look at this model in just a moment, but for now, let's have a little bit of background on these 44-ton switchers in real life. 386 44-ton switchers were built by General Electric between 1940 and 1956. As a relatively small locomotive, these engines were designed for light shunting/switching duties, yet unusually for a loco of this size, it was built with bogies rather than a fixed wheel set connected via coupling rods. The design served to help replace steam locomotives, being much more efficient and cheaper to run and maintain than steam. As well as serving in America, these shunters were also exported to Australia, Canada, Cuba and France, among others. During the Second World War, a modified version of the shunter with a lower cab roof for European clearances was produced to help with the war effort. Today, countless examples of 44-ton switcher can still be seen all over the world really, though mainly in America. Not all, though, are in running order. So there it is, up close and personal for you, the Bachmann 44-tonner. And like I say, for a beginner or maybe a modeler on a budget, this loco is just the job. In fact, I would say that it is perfect for that purpose. Obviously, as you're expecting, probably not massively complex, not massively high spec, but for the money, absolutely perfect. However, if I hold this to a slightly higher standard, it does of course start to fall down a little bit. Firstly, in terms of weight, because this is very, very light. So it weighs in at 126 grams, which is over 100 grams lighter than a Bachmann 08 shunter, which is exactly the same size as this. And it's even lighter than an 07 shunter at 199 grams, which is smaller than the 44-tonner. And that's because most of this loco, at least outwardly, is just made of plastic. So yeah, the body and the foot plate. Now again, for a modeler on a budget, that is perfectly acceptable. Die-cast body construction is definitely one of the things that modelers on a budget are happy to forego in order to get this model at a decent price. But if you are looking for something a bit more premium, that could be a red flag. Also, the build quality is just kind of so-so. These handrails are just made of plastic and they are quite flimsy, and a lot of people say, you know, the flexibility in these handrails does mean that they will flex rather than break, which is true, but then these haven't been fitted that great either. There are visible spots of glue in some places where too much glue has been applied, and then there are other places where no glue has been applied, and in fact the pieces are free to move around, and damn it, I've pulled those out. Hang on. So yeah, that combined with the lightweight of the model means that the build quality isn't absolutely marvellous, but it's not too bad and the level of detail is certainly okay. So like I said, the paint finish absolutely fine, and it's far from just a plain black loco either, because the running plate here has the yellow paintwork on it, which looks great. You've got the running number and the nickel plate road logo on the side, which is also excellently applied. You've got these great looking stripes on the ends, which really give me Pennsylvania GG1 vibes almost, and those are reasonably well applied as well. And there's quite a few different painted aspects of the model, such as this little detail on the running plate, the steps and the pilot area, as well as the shade around the lamps, which also has a little print on it. The quality of the paint isn't as high as we have seen from Bachmann in the past, but I think, again, as a budget model, this is perfectly serviceable. In terms of detail, here's a look at the bogie detail. Yeah, nothing separately fitted here, as you might expect, but there's a decent level of moulded detail. Same with the underframe, you've got these little either storage boxes or service hatches, which are nicely moulded, and the same with the engine bonnet as well. Nothing crazily complex going on here, but the moulded detail is certainly adequate. Around the cab you do have the glazing, which looks absolutely fine, and there even appears to be some separately fitted wipers on the front and back facing windows, which is great. And looking around the other side, there's a bit of a surprise because we've got an open window here, and inside you can see we do have a driver, which is a crazy feature for such a cheap loco, don't you think? There are so many models out there that cost a lot more than this that don't have anything like that. The downside is, though, that there is no other cab detail besides that, and in fact you can quite clearly see the circuit boards inside there. So while it's great that there is a driver here, he's no substitute for a proper cab interior, and in an ideal world I would like to see both a cab interior and a driver, but one of the two is better than none of the two. On the ends you can see we've got the grills detailed, and we've already mentioned the lamps briefly, but I haven't seen any mention of working lights on the instructions, so that might be a bit of a surprise for later on. And then down below there you've got this moving uncoupler here, which is a wire piece, unlike the rest of the detailing, which is just made of plastic. And there's Bachmann's Easy Mate coupler, which is just made of plastic, very simple as usually, but they do work well. I must say I've had a lot of these knuckle couplers made of metal, boasting higher quality, and they just don't work as well as Bachmann's. So Bachmann's are cheap, sure, but they do work. Finally then, up on top of the bonnets there is more moulded detail, including the exhausts from the engines, which are nicely moulded, and then on just one side you have the separately fitted horn, which again has got some fairly decent moulding on it. So it's a simple model, it is very lightweight, it is kind of the bare minimum in many ways, and while this sort of model wouldn't satisfy premium modelers all of the time, I think it is great to see a budget offering like this, and like I say, for £60, it's what I paid, $59.99, it is just the job. Would I be saying that if I'd paid £100 for this? Well, I don't know really. If it's a marvellous runner with a high quality mechanism, then yes, even that price would be okay, I think. But is that the case? Let's get this down onto the track, let's hook it up to my DCC controller, let's see how it runs, and let's take a look at the quality of the mechanism. Because this stuff is what's going to make or break this loco for me. So there it is, the Bachmann 44-ton switcher down onto the track, and the first performance test has already been filmed, and I will show you how that went in just a second. Now usually I will say I won't give you any spoilers on what the performance is like until I show you that segment, but on this occasion I am going to give you a slight spoiler and say that the performance is absolutely naff. To the point that I decided that during the mechanism section I would dismantle the locomotive and give it a little bit of oil, and its pickups are clean as well, just on the off chance that it's perhaps been sat in its box for a number of years and has become a little bit corroded and dry in places. Now this is not something I normally do in reviews because I'm supposed to be reviewing the models as they come, and so if I'm repairing things and improving things, then my review becomes a review of my work rather than of what the model is actually like. So I'm not going to be repairing anything here during the mechanism section, but I'm going to be lubricating it. So if you see me doing that, that's why. Right, so this was what I was confronted by when I decided I was going to dismantle this. Clip-on base keeper plates rather than screws. Now today you get to see why I prefer the screws, because when I was trying to remove the base keeper plate yep, one of those clips broke off. Now, I hold my hands up, yeah, this was me, this was not an issue from the factory. I did this, it's there on camera, but again, I was reasonably careful here. You do have to use a fair bit of force to overcome these clips, and at the end of the day, if screws had been used, this would not have happened. Anyway, underneath there, surprise, we do have proper turned bearings on the axles. This was a real surprise, not something I was expecting from a budget model, because often budget models have the level of detail cut down, which is fair enough, but they can also have the mechanisms cut down, and Bachmann is big on that sort of thing. On this occasion though, they are not. We've got proper bearings, which is really good to see. And if I remove one of those axles, you can see that there are proper wiper pickups on each of the wheels. And I did give these all a little bit of a wipe before I put the loco back together. In terms of body removal, for once, this is very, very simple. In fact, it's just 2 screws in the center of the loco, and then with a bit of care, you can remove the chassis from the body. So here is the chassis itself. It is die cast, although obviously not particularly chunky, and because it's married up with just a plastic body, the overall weight of the loco isn't that great. Here's the circuit board, which again is not very good because it's not clipped in properly, and there's something up with the moulding here because I push the circuit board in, it just doesn't stay in place, it pops back out again. So not very impressed with that. The decoder though is a separate part. It isn't as though the ICs are just soldered directly to the circuit board. It is hardwired to the circuit board, but that does mean if you really wanted to, you could desolder this decoder and substitute it with another of your own choice if you really wanted to. Still a pain that there's no DCC socket though, because that would make this much, much better. Here's an interesting thing. This does have lighting, and look at these LEDs. Very, very strange looking LEDs. I don't think I've seen any like this before on a loco. And then pulling the circuit board up out of the way, as well as its mount, you can see we've got the small standard Bachmann motor, which usually crops up in their steam locos. Not a big fan of this motor because I have seen failures on these before, but it could be a 5-polar, so that's pretty good, although there is no flywheel fitted to it. And yes, I did give this a bit of light lubrication before reassembly. Then the gauge comes in at 14.3 to 14.4 millimeters back to back, which is fairly close to the standard. So that is the mechanism. Generally, yeah, it's okay. The build quality leaves quite a bit to be desired, and I wish there was a flywheel and a proper DCC decoder socket. But again, for a budget model, I would say the mechanism is all it really needs to be. Performance though is another matter. Let me roll back time for you and show you what happened during that first performance test. Right, so I've already taken the liberty of reprogramming the decoder address so that it's number 90, nice and easy to remember, but I have not yet put any power to this loco. So I'm using my NCE power cab. It's all powered up and ready to go. I'm going to give it some juice on 28 speed steps to begin with, and let's see if this loco is going to work. So I'm going to give it one little increment, speed 1. It's farting. Okay. Speed step 2. The farting has not changed in amplitude or frequency. Okay, 3. I did hear a change in the farting. 4. Yeah, it seems to be getting slightly higher in frequency. 5. Slight change again. I'm getting concerned now that nothing's happening. 6. Slight change. 7, 8. Alright, this is not good. I turned it up massively and it kind of just died. That's at full pel. It's somewhat less than impressive, isn't it? Let me just make sure there's nothing obviously wrong with this thing. Right, no, can't see any issues with it, unfortunately, so that might not be good. I sort of squeezed one of the bits of bogey detailing back into place because it was a bit out of position, but I don't think that will make much difference. Seems to be really struggling. I don't know, it seems to be cutting out quite a bit. Yeah, as though it's not getting good power, and it looks as though it's got power to all pickups. And if I can get it to go for a bit, oh, which it kind of is doing, let's try it in the other direction. Might just be able to get it to overcome the issue. But yeah, it's not working well. Not working well at all. Getting slightly better. It sounds dreadful. Alright, it did actually sustain there. It's cut out again. But yeah, I mean, it's running somewhat better now. But it certainly doesn't sound good at all. But, you know, maybe it's just been sat in its box for a little while. Maybe. So I'm not sure really what to do here. I think, as per my policy with reviews, I'm not going to start taking this apart and troubleshooting it because, you know, I test stuff as it is out of the box. I buy something brand new. I want to see how it works out of the box. So I think before I do open this up to try and find out what's wrong, I'm going to give it the benefit of the doubt. I'll let it run around the layout and see if this improves. And then when I dismantle it to do the mechanism section, I'll give it some oil if it looks particularly dry, if that seems to be the issue. For now though, let's just have a quick look at what other features this has got. It does seem to be crawling well now though. Interesting. Let's activate some of the functions. Does it have lights? Oh wow, it does. Crikey. And I can toggle between dim and bright, which is good. Don't seem to be able to turn them back off though now that they're on. So, okay. And a crawl, is that any good? Speed step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Trying to crawl at 7. Trying to crawl at 8, 9. Pretty much sustaining, very slowly to be fair, at 9. But that means we've got 28 speed steps, and 8 of them are no good. So that's irritating. Does this work on 128 speed steps? Let's try, let's set it to that. Let's go for a reverse this time. Yeah, I can hear the sound noticeably changing with each speed step at 128 as well. And as I turn up, I'm at 18 now. And it's just starting to move at 18, 19, 20. So I would say it is supporting 128 speed steps, which, yeah, makes it a little bit more controllable, I suppose. So with that, hopefully the performance will improve massively. Let's go at half speed, which will be 14. Okay, that's farcically slow. Let's go at full speed. Right, okay. So performance less than impressive. It isn't cutting out anymore, so maybe the pickups had just tarnished themselves a little bit, and now that they've wiped the wheels a little bit, they are conducting a bit better. The speed already is noticeably getting higher, so yeah, I think this is possibly just, maybe it's been in the shop for a little while, maybe it didn't sell, maybe they reduced the price or something so that this is old. I did notice that catalogue on that Bachmann and Williams advertisement thing, that said 2013, which could make this 10 years old. So yeah, maybe it just needs half an hour in either direction to warm up, and then it will be much better. We'll definitely have to see how this thing runs after a proper run-in. But yeah, it's certainly better than it was when I first tried it already, which is a very good sign. How it actually turns out is yet to be seen. So I'll let this run 30 minutes forwards, 30 minutes backwards, the usual drill. And then we'll come back, we'll test the pulling power, we'll test the crawl and the various speeds yet again, and I will make a judgment on the performance. Okay, well, I'll see you shortly, folks. Okay, so things have changed quite dramatically since last you saw this loco. Obviously, it's had a little bit of lubrication now, the pickups have had a bit of a clean, and it's also had a full run-in, which has obviously made quite a difference. The Loco's running better now. It's not cutting out anywhere near as much, which is good. It's still very, very noisy, as I'm sure you would have heard just a second ago, and it's also not particularly smooth. However, it is way, way better than it was before. I think it will now sustain a sort of medium speed run past you, so let me just back it out of shot and set it to 14, which is half speed. And this is not as ludicrously slow as it was before. It's not smooth, as you can see. It keeps sort of hesitating, and I thought that maybe there was a wire or something pressing on the drive shaft that was causing these issues, and also the noise. So I've actually had the body off quite a few times to investigate that. Can't see anything along those lines occurring. So yes, I've done a fair bit of investigation, which obviously is not really a part of my reviews, but yeah, there's nothing obviously the matter with this, although it would be fair for me to say, yeah, possibly this has got a faulty motor or some sort of faulty component inside it, which has caused these issues, because maybe they're not all like this. If you've got one of these, please do let me know what the performance is like, but obviously all I can do is tell you how mine runs, and well, I don't have to tell you because you can see for yourself. On the plus side though, it is a good slow runner, as you can see. I don't know if it's supposed to be this slow or whether it's just struggling, but it is slow. And the gearing is obviously quite sensible, because even at full speed, it's pretty slow. Let's go past again. Ready? Yeah, I mean, it sounds like some sort of dying mammal, but apart from that, yeah, it is good and slow. And speaking of slow, let's really try a crawl, so it doesn't kick into about at least 5, and no, it still hasn't, so let's go up to 6, and I'll show you the point at which this begins to crawl. And yeah, it is starting to move at 6 there. Not very smooth, it kind of has a little move and then it stops. So maybe 7 is where we need to be. Yeah, 7 is a little bit more consistent, as you can see. So, in a sense, as a switcher, it's pretty good. You know, it can do some very precise shunting, as you can see. The pulling power was not great as a result of its light weight, so it comes in at 0.14 newtons, which is only enough for this to haul around 12 coaches on straight and level track. So yeah, not very impressive. And of course, it's so light that if you do couple up to something as slowly as I had it running a minute ago, it's probably just going to push the wagons away from it, rather than actually having enough oomph to actually push the couplings together and make them actuate. But we'll see, because I've got these box fans ready to go. There's 5 of those, and they are quite modern ones with relatively freewheeling axles in them. So let's give this a try. Let's check that the couplings are at the right height, and let's see if we can actually get a coupling at about speed 10, let's say. So it's been about 45 minutes since the last angle you saw, and I'm beginning to regret setting this to speed 10, but that's a good thing, because obviously at the slow speeds it's actually rather impressive. And I have to say, that's a rare state of events, isn't it? Because usually a Loco can be impressive at the higher speeds, but it can really suck at a crawl. This one is a very rare example of the opposite being true. Anyway, well, we're kind of close, aren't we? So I might as well just let it go. I've gone and pressed something on my controller now, no, but it's okay. Okay, the big moment has finally arrived. And yeah, they're kind of almost coupled. I suspect it's probably the rubbishy AliExpress coupling that's to blame there. So let me just hold this in position. There we go, they've gone now. And let's see if we can move these at the same slow pace. Yeah, it seems that we can. It's like living life in slow motion, isn't it? But yeah, it is impressive that this Loco can do that when its performance is really quite rubbish. So, it sounds very unhealthy, I'll warn you, but let's now speed this up to about... shall we go for half speed? Yeah, why not? Let's go for about, well, let's go a bit more than half. Let's go for about 17. Because that looks like a good switching speed, doesn't it? And we'll see how it gets on around the track. So on the middle line, I have another shunter from Bachmann. This one's from the UK though, and it is the 08 shunter. And I have to say, the mechanism, to an extent, and certainly the performance and the level of detail is much, much higher on this model. And it's quite an old one too. This loco is not perfect either, but it's much more pleasant to run, so that's one to bear in mind, the 08. And then, since I showed it earlier, I figured people might want to see it, so I've got the 07 shunter, which is a Haulage loco. It's coming now, just wait a sec, there it is. And again, much more detailed, and while the mechanism may be a lot worse in this, the actual performance is still better than the 44 tonner, so that's certainly something to bear in mind. Alright, so it's making, fair speed now, although I've noticed it is changing speed quite dramatically, which is not expected on DCC at all. And as you can see around this curve, a noticeable slowdown there. Though not so much with the second curve there. So yeah, it's an odd loco, that's for sure. Doesn't seem to be struggling too much with this number of fans, but obviously the pulling power was not amazing, so it's not going to be a mighty hauler or anything. So it's difficult to know what to recommend here, I suppose, because obviously if mine's a one-off fault, then there's no reason why I wouldn't recommend this to you. Having said that, even if mine did run well, the quality of the loco is a little bit questionable. Yes, on the outside, but also on the inside, the clips, the lack of DCC socket, the way the circuit board doesn't sit in there properly. Yeah, it's not the best example of a quality loco by any stretch of the imagination. But on the other hand, it's probably reasonably safe to assume that this is just a fault and order one if that's what you want to do. I don't say that it's safe to assume that, because you'll probably be right and not end up with a faulty model, but safe in the sense that if there is a fault, you can return it to wherever you bought it for a refund or a replacement. So, it's up to you. If you check the comment section and lots of people are saying, yeah, I've got one and it runs exactly like this, then probably move on, because there are lots of other budget locos that, are just as good a value as this, but they actually work properly, and I think something like that would certainly be preferable, and there are lots of reviews like that on the channel. So if you are looking for a good value loco with a good mechanism and good performance as well, this one might not be the one for you. But in a way it almost feels bad to say that, because there are some really good aspects to this loco, the price being one, the proper bearings, and the general setup of the mechanism is really quite good. But that doesn't change the fact that my example is still not running that well, even after all of that maintenance I did and the troubleshooting. So, I guess if you're really comfortable with taking locos apart and maybe making new parts for them and servicing them, trying to figure out what's wrong, then this could be a reasonable buy for a project, but I don't really know how many people are quite willing to do that. So, yeah, overall, I think this is one to avoid for the most part, but there might be reasons why you would be induced to pick one of these up if the price was right. So I wouldn't discount it entirely, but I also wouldn't go rushing out to buy one anytime soon if I were you. But it's been an interesting loco to look at. I do quite like it as locos go. Just a pity it doesn't work quite as well as I'd hoped. Let's have some ratings then for the Bachmann General Electric 44-ton switcher. Now, this is supposed to be a budget model, I think, and so the relatively basic level of detail isn't a problem per se, but I obviously have to rate this compared with other locos I've looked at, so it is for me a 2.5 star. It loses marks for the lack of cab interior detail, the slightly sloppy paintwork when viewed up close, and the relatively heavy reliance on moulded detail as opposed to separately fitted ones. Having said that, we do have the driver separately fitted, which is great. It does have lights on it, and the moulded detail doesn't look too bad, so it gets a very middle of the road 2.5 star. The performance is actually better than I thought it was going to be based on the first test, although obviously again I have seen better, so I've given it 3 star. Not that smooth, it has to be said. At the higher speeds, not smooth at all. Seems like it's struggling all the time, makes a funny noise. Like I say, I've done a fair bit of troubleshooting on that issue, but there's only so much I'm willing to do in a review. Really, I'm not supposed to do anything. Ideally, I would just get a model out, test it, and talk about the way it runs straight out of the box. Even with a fair bit of troubleshooting though, even with a bit of a service, this issue has not improved sufficiently. It has improved a little, but not to the point where I would say it's a marvellous performer. Having said that though, the gearing is pretty good, the crawl is fair as well, it is just a little bit unreliable. The pulling power, again, not very good at all because it's so light at 126 grams. So 12 coaches at most, that's on straight and level track. Even my 3D printed locomotives can match or sometimes even beat that. It's even less than a Bachmann 03 shunter, which is much smaller. The mechanism I've given 3-star. There are some great aspects to this mechanism. I like the proper separately fitted bearings. It does have all-wheel pickup, but it's let down by the lack of flywheel on the motor, which also seems to be a relatively puny one. I reckon they could have perhaps used a slightly larger one, even though the loco is fairly small. There's no DCC socket on board, and it also relies on clips to hold the bogies together rather than screws. And on this occasion, when I was accessing the bogies in order to service them, one of those clips broke, which would not have happened had they used screws. The quality then is a 3-star for me. The build quality is not too bad, but there was some visible glue, some details that were not stuck on properly, like those handrails. You've got the plastic construction of the body, which has led to the lightweight model. You've got the circuit board, which doesn't fit properly because it doesn't clip in right, and perhaps the moulding on the clips was to blame for that, but either way it's true. And the clips are quite weak that holds the bogies. So I think if anything, I've been quite generous in giving this 3-star on quality. Value for money then, $129 is the highest price I could find this for, and I paid £59.99. Now, if the loco had have worked properly and it was a little bit better quality, this would have been an easy 5-star. As it is though, yes, the downsides to the model are reflected in the price, so I'm not giving it a low score, but it's certainly not a bargain either, so I've given it a 4-star. Yeah, decent value, particularly if the performance issues with mine are due to mine being a faulty example. You know, if they're not typical of this model, then I could probably recommend this more highly. If you've got one of these incidentally, please do let me know because I'd be interested in whether that's true or not. Overall then, that is 5.77 out of 10. Yeah, fairly disappointing. That's a grade of E, and I do think that's deserved. There's really not a lot to shout about here. It's okay in areas, but not quite up to the mark in others. Into the logbook it goes then, and it is 27th place above the EFE Rail J94 and below the Hornby A2/3. Well folks, thank you so much for tuning in for yet another review. Quite an interesting loco this, both in the way it performed and just the general loco on its own. If things change and the loco's performance improves the more I run it, then I will of course make an update to this video, but I don't have ever so high hopes of that because it has been running for a good couple of hours now throughout the various filming that I've been doing, and you know, it's still noisy and not dreadfully smooth, but equally nowhere near as bad as it was when I started filming the performance. So yeah, it's not terrible, but it's not brilliant. I have of course seen a lot worse though. At least this didn't cost a fortune as some utterly naff locos do, so it's got that for it. Anyway, like I say, please do comment down below, let me know what you think about this. What are your experiences with this design of Bachmann loco, and are they different to mine, or are they the same as mine? Please do let me know. For now though, I will see you very, very soon for another video. Alright, cheers folks, you take care.